Welcome to Healthcare IT Today. I'm John Lynn, together with my colleague and friend Colin Hung. The world of technology and healthcare, ever changing in new and novel ways, and that's why we love this stuff. So join us as we discuss the latest healthcare and health IT news, meshed together in new ways which help generate ideas and new perspectives. Plus, we'll have a little fun along the way. Today, we're going to be asking the question, where are they now? Looking at a bunch of different topics, and be sure to follow the show on social media at the hashtag HITSM and our personal accounts at TechGuy and at Colin_Hung. Plus, check out our 19 years of health IT content at healthcareittoday.com. Colin, tell me the truth. 20 years ago, did you think you'd be a blogger and a podcaster when you grew up?
I did, I did not. I did not think I would be in the media doing what we're doing, but I love it. And but even doesn't have to go back 20 years. I mean, we were, in preparation for this episode, John, we went back and looked at some of the old topics we covered on this podcast, and it's just amazing to see some of the topics that we covered.
Yeah, I don't remember who I was talking to, but oh yeah, I was at the Barrel Institute conference. I was talking with someone who'd been around for a long time, worked at Epic, all these things, now working at a different company, and I mean just the amount of change that has happened in the years that we've been doing it, and, even the last 4 years, but 15 years, like dramatically different, and it's crazy to see all of the things that kind of developed and became what we have today.
Yeah. No, it's fun. It's fun to look back. And that's going to be today's kind of topic. We're going back and looking at topics that we've discussed and kind of just asking, where are they now? Some of them might be relevant, some of them may not be. So right out of the gate, John, got to go with one of my favorite ones, blockchain. Where is that now in healthcare?
Mostly dead. Is that a Princess Bride reference? He's not dead. It's mostly dead. I think it's not that blockchain is dead, and certainly in the cryptocurrency space, it's still alive and well in a lot of different interesting ways. But I think that the hype around it is dead. And now they're like, oh, okay, how can we really use this? And there's a few categories where it could be useful and where some people are using it, but it's not it's not AI. Right? Like AI, we look at it and it's like that's going to transform so many things. Blockchain, it could be beneficial for a few use cases, but probably not well beyond that. And it's certainly not going to transform healthcare. So I would say, like Princess Bride, it's mostly dead.
I like the reference. I love the reference. Yeah, for me, it was like one of the quickest hype cycle ups and downs in healthcare tech. I mean, there was so much hype when it first came out, and then it just dropped off the map for me. It just everyone just stopped talking about it. And I think it's a good thing, right? In the sense of people tried it, people tried to find a good use case for it. We didn't find any of it, and then we moved on. So and it I don't know if it'll ever make a return back to healthcare, but certainly I think we've proven that it's not a universally applicable software or solution to everything. So, yeah, that's a kind of a throwback to see that we had covered blockchain in the past.
Yeah, I mean, having an immutable chain, that was powerful, and having it distributed, that's powerful. So I could see those ideas coming back in a different way, but not in their current form, where it's more expensive, it's slower, it's energy inefficient, et cetera, et cetera.
So the next "Where Are They Now" topic, John, we talked about this a while back. Access to medical records. Where is that now?
This is like a super frustrating topic. I mean, I was just reading, was it Grace Cordovano's post on LinkedIn talking about, hey, if you're a patient that needs access to your records, this is what you have to deal with. And it's a disaster and a mess. I don't know if we're not talking about it because access to those records has gotten better. You can go into a portal and see some, you can request it digitally and you can get access. It's very clear you deserve access and you have a right to access it. And so maybe that kind of quelled some of the discussion where it's like, yeah, you do. But in practice, if you're a patient with multiple specialists and multiple organizations, this is still a huge problem. But we really aren't talking about it as much, I think, because there are options to get it. They just kind of suck because healthcare is so fragmented.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I think in the context when we used to talk about it, you couldn't get access, or you had to pay these really, very high fees to get access to it, or it came on mediums that weren't useful for you. Like how many of us had a CD-ROM drive anymore, right?
It
Um,
gets mailed to you.
Right. So I think we've solved some of the problems. Like we don't hear the stories anymore about patients having to pay big fees to get their data or arriving on mediums that they can't actually use. I think so. To your point, I think we solved a lot of that, but it's still a very frustrating, very slow, very manual process. So that hasn't been solved. But I think I guess you can say, and not to say we've accepted it, but I think the sensationalist stories have gone away. Right now, it's just more of like, yeah, and you got to go to 15 places to get your data, but everyone has to do that, not just patients. Like docs have to do this too. So, yeah, it's kind of where are we now? We got a little bit better, but we haven't got there yet, and we're not talking about it either. All right, John, let's move on to the next "Where are they now" topic, and that is physician reputation. Where are we now with that?
Yeah, it's a challenging one because if you're a doctor, I think you're getting more and more reviews. I do think Google has kind of dominated that, Google Places and things like that, and the ability to just review it right there and have it incorporated in the results. So I think they've become quite dominant. So, I think the other problem is doctors aren't as interested in their reputation because a lot of the doctors are working for larger health systems. So the health systems care about their doctor's reputation kind of in this macro view. But when you don't own your own practice, you look at it a little different. Now, maybe it's also shifted. It was kind of a healthcare IT today topic because it was a health IT solution, new websites, new rating platforms, all of those things. But now it's more of a sway.health, our marketing topic, because those platforms, the review sites, et cetera, are more mature. So there are amazing companies doing this. We know Raterate that works with us at Sway Health. They're built around this concept of following the reviews. Social Climb even does some stuff. And so it's a big topic, but I'd say it's shifted from kind of the individual physician to the macro health system that cares about it, with the exception of course, every doctor hates seeing a bad review, but
Yeah, it's funny. I think we're still talking about this topic, but you're right. It's morphed. I think before there was this, but way back then when the topic first came up, there was this theory that we would all be making decisions using this data as one point to make decisions. And although I think that's true for some types of docs, some specialties, I think for for many others, it doesn't matter because there's so few of them. You're just basically going to see who's available, right? Like, you don't have the luxury of being able to compare and contrast multiple options here. You probably only have one or two. So in those instances, I think physician reputation means a little bit less versus one where I have like 10 different options I can go and see, either because my plan allows that or just because I'm in that kind of an area where I actually have so many options. So yeah, I still think it's important, as you said. I think Google's come to dominate this just because of the map functionality and all the things that Google does. But I still think it is something that people care about. It's just not getting as much press and as much airtime as it used to.
This is a bit of a cynical view, but I wonder if, everyone's kind of figured out how to game the system to make sure their good patients are reviewing them. So now everyone looks good. And so that's why it's less of a topic because they are using tools to drive them to, because what happened is initially it was a wave of all the people who were just pissed off. And then they're like, wait, I need to tell my patients that are happy to go review me and let's overwhelm the system of that, not let a few people that didn't have a good experience ruin it. So I don't know if that's evolved. But it's interesting your point about the patients, not looking to them as much because they just don't have choice. How about the topic of consumerism? What have you seen kind of evolve in consumerism?
Yeah, it's funny. That term itself, I think we've seen drop away. I don't think we use the term consumerism in health as much as we used to when we first brought this topic up. But I think the elements are still there, right? Like everything that consumerism was about, all the movement towards making it easier for patients to get to a doc, to schedule, to do all those things that were part of the consumer thrust, I think are still happening. We just don't call it consumerism anymore. It's just become part of healthcare, which I think is a good thing.
Well, I think there's two ways that we look at consumerism too, which is when we talked about it, I think it was more like there's this movement, the consumer is going to have all this power. And I think we realized, well, the consumer could have some power, but the healthcare organizations still have most of it. And so it's changed. could we create a consumer experience? So we talk about that rather than consumerism, which was kind of this trend of like, oh, is the consumer going to take over healthcare and remodel it? And maybe AI will, if it ever gets good enough to replace the doctor, then consumerism will really come back into play, but it will still be called AI doc, not consumerism.
I agree. I agree. And it's kind of related to another topic that was kind of helping that consumerism push. And that's, of course, John, retail health. That was a topic that, we spent some time chatting about. Where is that now?
I mean, it's mostly dead again. It's there with blockchain. Like it'll probably recycle again in a couple of years. So that's the interesting thing is when you have so much money as a retail organization, you got to figure out where to spend it, and you can only have so many retail spots. So healthcare seems to have a lot of money. So I do think it's cyclical. It'll come back, unlike blockchain, which I don't think will come back in the same way. Retail health, yeah, it's mostly dead. We'll see a few, innovation ones. I remember one company that was putting clinics in banks. I thought that was fascinating. So we'll see little elements of it, but yeah, I think they don't like healthcare.
I think yeah, I agree. I think the what was tried obviously didn't work out economically, but I did think it worked out in terms of I think people and patients appreciated it. I think they appreciated going to a Walmart and being able to see a doc for some common ailments and things like that. But I think from a financial point of view, clearly it didn't work out. So to your point, I think it will come back, maybe in a different form. Maybe it's all online. We're certainly seeing a lot of that happen, retail health like online. Um, but yeah, I think right now we're not going to be talking about it for a few more years because I don't think it's coming back anytime real soon.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting that correlates to telehealth as well, right? And the direct to consumer options and the availability. But here's another one, remote workforce. That's kind of was a hot topic. Of course, COVID pushed a lot of that topic. But it's interesting how that's evolved. For me, I actually see a lot of IT organizations in healthcare that are still open to it, and health IT organizations even are open to it, and kind of an embrace that fact. I see more and more IT professionals that are living in Oregon and working in LA, or living in Salt Lake and working in Stanford. I know specific cases of this, and I think it's beautiful that they're able to do that. And so I think again, it's kind of just become a standard. The macro discussion in the economy is back to office, but I think in healthcare it's much more nuanced. Although the ironic thing is, if you're a nurse, a doctor, a surgeon, you're going to be in person. There's not really a remote option, and that probably won't change for a while.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we are not talking about it because I think it's just become part of doing business in healthcare. I think there are some parts of the healthcare workforce that can work remote. I think a lot of IT staff, for example, they're like, listen, that precious office space, we need it for something else. So, you're working remote. I
Yeah.
also think that some specialties like radiology do lend itself very well to working remote, right? We're hearing about people being able to read at home and all the security that can come along with it and to be able to enable that. So
Yeah.
I think that's happening. But to your point, I think a lot of it also came back because it has to be in person. And you need the people to be there in order to take care of the patients right there. So just not. I think it's like some of the others we've spoken about. It's just become part of doing business.
Yeah. Medical billings like radiology, it can be done remotely too.
There you go. Hey, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to Healthcare IT Today with John Lynn and Colin Hung. Today, we are asking the question, where are they now? Where are some of these topics that we talked about a long time ago? Are they still relevant today? Next up, John, is a topic that's near and dear to both our hearts, healthcare social media. Where is that?
I mean, it is near to us because that's how we met, right? Like, would we have met if it weren't for healthcare social media? That's an interesting question. I think the answer is no, maybe at a conference, I guess. But yeah, it is fascinating. Like, when we were preparing for this, I'm like, when did I last write an article on social media and using it in healthcare? Decade? I don't know. It's been a long time. And it's not that we don't use social media, but I think we just know how to use it. So now there's not, we're not really covering and teaching people how to use social media. We get a little bit, right? There was a shift from X to LinkedIn that's kind of happened over time, but we kind of know how to use it. And, there's still occasional things that we'll see and do, but yeah, for the most part, it's just kind of part of the fabric of what we do, and we know how to do it. So we're not really talking about, have I seen a session at a conference about leveraging social media? That used to be all the rage, let's teach the doctors how to use it. Let's teach your HIM professionals how to use it, whoever, right? Like, and now, that would be kind of a funny session at a conference, except at our marketing conference, which is a different story.
That's true. No, and I think to your point, I think obviously it was a hot thing for a while, and now it's just become part of business. I do think that there are still some small elements of that. I think we're there are some areas that we're still talking about how to leverage video more. How to use or leverage influencers on social media, right? So it's kind of, I'll call it, we've moved up a level. We're in a higher plane, right, of using social media. We're talking about how do we leverage like influencers on those platforms, as opposed to should we or shouldn't we, how to do those things. I think we are in our daily lives, we've all become aware of and use social media in some form or fashion. So it's less about talking about the topic anymore. It's just part of doing business.
Well, and that's one of the other challenges that we face. If you were to start a new social account right now, building a following is just miserable because we're not in the follow unfollow mode, right? Where there people are discovering. It's like you either have an audience or you don't. Building an audience is really hard.
It is really hard. Well, and speaking about something that was really hard at one point, John, online scheduling. Where is that topic now?
Yeah, I mean, you live, eat, breathe, and sleep this, so I'd love to hear what you think. But I'd say it's again, it's just kind of the fabric of what's happening, and most organizations have said, I need to have this option, at least for a number of different specialties or use cases. Like if I'm a primary care doctor, why wouldn't I do this? It just makes sense, right? I think there's some specialties that maybe are a little harder to do than others, but even cancer docs, right? Where, the patient needs to come in every week or every other, week, like they know the rhythm, they know how long it needs to be, like let them have some flexibility, give them some power as patients. So anyway, we know how to do it. We know where it can't be done or shouldn't be done. It did take a culture shift, but I'd say now it's just part of the fabric of most healthcare organizations.
Yeah, I say we're not talking about it because I think most people have initiatives to implement it.
Hmm.
I still think there is a lot of resistance to it. So I think, we hear stories still at patient experience conferences where there's a struggle internally to get some departments, some docs to come on board. For a variety of reasons. They believe they want more control of the schedule. They don't have availability. There's a lot of reasons why or why not, but it has shifted where it's much more of an internal conversation around online scheduling as opposed to a macro discussion about whether or not this is a good idea and how to do it. I think most people know how to do it. They know what they want. Patients are very vocal about what they want and will walk, will vote with their feet if they can't get access to it. So I don't think we're talking about it as much
Yeah.
for good reasons. Uh, RPM, John, what do you think about that one? This one's an interesting one.
It is tricky, and I think RPM's been kind of like AI. I always say marketers ruin everything. I think RPM has morphed into like such a wide variety of things, probably because the number of sensors, cameras, video, like lidar, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right, can monitor more and do really cool things with it. But I think that what's interesting is we aren't talking about it as much. And it's not clear to me exactly why it is. A part of me thinks it might be that the business models just aren't playing out there the way we thought they would. I don't know if the data is not medically relevant enough or if, like, I don't know. Like, I think we have some success stories and those are going well and they're rolling out. But, it certainly wasn't the panacea that we thought it could be to be able to do mass prevention of illness. Again, does it need to be a little more medically relevant in what it's monitoring? Do we need the sensors and wearables to improve that way, and then it will blow up? Maybe is what we're waiting for, but I think there's some niche use cases that are powerful and they're seeing success, but certainly wasn't the broad adoption that I think many of us hoped for.
I certainly agree with you that remote patient monitoring didn't live up to the potential hype that we associated with it or the potential benefits that we associated with it. But I'm going to disagree with you. I think this is still being talked about. I still think this is a relevant topic today. You know, you can't go to a conference and not see some new wearable, some new thing. So I think there's a lot of investment still happening. And I certainly hear and see a lot of movement towards care at home initiatives, taking care of patients in their space as opposed to trying to build more hospitals. So I think it's being spoken about, but maybe not specific RPM. I think just RPM gets baked into these kinds of discussions around I need to care for patients outside of the four walls of my hospital. How do I do that? Well, you'll need a remote patient monitoring element of it. Maybe not with a wearable, maybe with something more sophisticated. But those devices and those kinds of things, I certainly see. In fact, we did one recently at HIMSS where I interviewed the Caregility folks, right, that are kind of doing virtual care, remote monitoring with inside the hospital. So, I mean, I still think it's a good topic, a hot topic, and something that we're still discussing today.
Yeah, the enterprise element is good, and then the at home is definitely going that way. There's a topic I want to hear from you because I know you're so passionate about it. Is SDOH, and maybe we could throw in health equity there as kind of a related one. But where do you think we're at on that?
Yeah, sadly, this one has not been spoken about much to my disappointment because I still think it's an important, very hot topic. I think SDOH I think it's so hard to fix. There's no one silver bullet. So I think the SDOH discussions we had back then were more about surfacing the data to show that this was a problem. And I think we did a good job at that. But then the next step of, well, how do you solve that? That became less clear. And because it wasn't very clear, I still think we're struggling with it. But when you have this sort of amorphous problem, a societal problem, some would say, it's hard. And so I don't think it's gone away completely. I just think it's kind of, it's at a simmer level, I think. And then the problem with health equity, and I did an interview with on this topic not too long ago at Vive. I think unfortunately health equity got lumped in with DEI.
Mm.
And I think that, so I think right now DEI is going through a trough, a valley, right, of popularity, obviously. And I think unfortunately health equity kind of got lumped into that, and I don't see them as the same thing. But I think right now it's just really hard to get a health equity initiative off the ground and to even get it funded. So I think unfortunately it's just something we're not talking about.
Yeah, I think you're right to some degree as far as we talked a lot about SDOH and then we kind of said, oh crap, this is hard. Because not only do I need the data to inform what's happening in SDOH, but then I need the connections to the services to be able to solve what the data is telling you is the problem. And that becomes a much bigger problem. And how do we pay for it? And okay, let's deal with business models. So there are some companies still working with it. I saw Dell Sanders actually came out of retirement because he wants to work on this problem with I think it's called Unite Us, right? Is the platform. So there's some that are I think still simmering there that are saying, hey, we are still focused on this. This is our mission. And yes, this is a really challenging problem, but can we connect this? So I actually think it could have a renaissance, which would be awesome, where hey, we do have enough data to solve this problem in a way, and we have the connections to the community that it could actually solve it. So I'm hopeful it will come back, but definitely it's become a problem.
I'm interested in this one from you, John. Surprise billing is,
Mm.
we talked about it for a while. It seems to have dropped off the map for me. What are your thoughts on that?
I think we all just got angry once the transparency law came in and then the hospitals published their rates and everyone looked at it and said, this is like reading hieroglyphics that I dug out of, some tomb in Egypt. It doesn't make any sense to me. You know, this isn't transparency that I want, right? And so, sure, I think hospitals are a little more aware of sending a surprise bill and trying to be a little more transparent with patients in the organization. But I think, between hospital transparency, which kind of doesn't exist in a lot of ways, and the surprise billing, which now healthcare organizations are trying to address, so that doesn't happen. So you're still saying yes to that $40,000 treatment, but we're going to tell you up front, hey, it's $40,000, so right? At least that I guess that's a good change to some degree. But yeah, surprise billing and pricing transparency are two things that we kind of looked at and said, this is really screwed up, but I don't know how I solve it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think it's talked about. Unfortunately, I think it's not talked about because we haven't got a solution for it. So I think it'll probably come back when it becomes a problem again that politicians and others want to solve. I just think right now there's not a motivation to solve it. There's other bigger problems, and which leads me to my next one, John. For you, we talked about this a lot. Healthcare disruption. Where is that? Is it coming?
Yeah. Throw it in with digital transformation, that was in that same kind of category. I think what we realized, and I think most big tech companies have even realized, they're like, we're going to disrupt healthcare. And then they looked at it and they're like, no, we are not going to disrupt healthcare. Like, that's too hard. Maybe I can make it a little more efficient. I can do incremental changes, but I think the Borg that is healthcare is really tough to disrupt. So I think, we still hear it occasionally. It's usually a startup company that then 6 months later realizes, never mind, we're not disrupting healthcare either.
Yeah, I think rightfully that term healthcare disruptor is now people roll their eyes when people say it. I think before it was kind of a cool thing, it was an interesting thing, it was an interesting concept, obviously. But the reality is, for anyone inside, healthcare is a behemoth, right? It's very, very hard to disrupt. I think there's disruption that's caused by things, but to disrupt it in a good way with technology is very, very difficult. Digital transformation, though, I think is happening internally, but we aren't talking about it. There's still digital transformation initiatives happening at hospitals. We hear about those all the time. So I think it's happening, but it's quiet. It's internal. It's not really making the headlines.
Yeah, for sure.
Final one, John. Physician practices. Why aren't we talking about physician practices more?
Do physician practices exist? I think they're kind of like the woolly mammoth, right? We heard about them. It's not fully true, right? But it's close because hospital and health systems bought up so many, private equity bought up so many. There are large group practices, so those ones are still somewhat autonomous, and often physician led. Although can they resist the pull of private equity? I'm not sure, right? Like, we'll see how that evolves. But what's interesting is everyone always told me it was cyclical. And it was for a long time, right? Build your practice, get bought out by the health system, then 2, 3 years later say, I don't like to work for the health system. Let's go back and build the practice again. But I would say over the last decade, I don't know a single person who's gone from a health system and built their own practice. And I think there's a lot of reasons why: the infrastructure, the regulatory environment, the reimbursement environment. I don't see much that's going to change that. The only exception might be the direct primary care, concierge medicine. We've seen a few people do that, right? But that's where they're shunning the system entirely and saying, let's go to direct to consumer. So I actually think the physician-owned practice is something that's rare, and we could create a special place for them if they've survived.
I agree with you. I think DPC is probably the only area that we're talking about physician practices today. But can't disagree with you there, John. Hey, listen, thanks to all of you who tuned into this episode of Healthcare IT Today. You can find out more about our show by checking out the programs page on healthcarenowradio.com. And please share your voice and engage with the community at healthcareitttoday.com and on social media using the hashtag HITSM. I'm Colin Hung with my friend and health IT collaborator, John Lynn. Thanks for listening and have a great week.